So welcome everyone to today's session, which is entitled Materials and Procurement. And our team today is Megan Best, our co-founder of Native Events, myself, Noreen Lucy, and I'm Sustainability Coordinator with Native Events. And as always, supporting us technically and keeping us all in check, Brecon Byron, our Programs Manager from Native Events. So I suppose, as we always do, we kind of check in and do a recap on where we are on the training webinar. And it's just so nice to see that we're progressing on and we're nearing the end of the webinars. So we will be leaving you for the summer after today. So we'll take a break and then we'll be back online again in October 15th when we'll cover audience travel. And then the following week on October 22nd, travel and transport. And then, of course, we're having our webinars for green festivals in September and October. So it's great to see the progression there. And thank you to all of you for attending all of the sessions so far. I suppose a quick recap, if you've missed any of the sessions, you can always have a look at all of the recordings and the slides. And I suppose as well, importantly, the resources that we mentioned during the webinars, they're all saved on the Arts Council's webpage. So I suppose just to recap, the sessions so far and what we've been working through and where we are at the moment and what you should have an understanding of is really we've covered the environmental policy and the action plan. We've gone through that in terms of what that should cover and what that looks like and how you can craft that. And really, I suppose, what to focus on in your policy and plan. And then we moved on to, I suppose, engaging with the important people that should be involved in the creation of your policy and action plan and how to engage with them. And really, I suppose, that process of bringing a team together so that it's not one person creating that policy and plan, it's involving everybody and everybody has buy-in. And then we started looking at how to measure your impacts. We looked at activities that impact on biodiversity. And then last week, we really focused in on the impact area of energy in your buildings. So today, we'll be looking at materials and your procurement plan. But I suppose we just wanted to check in with you. I suppose it's quite difficult with the webinars, we're not in person. We always kind of wanted to get a sense of how you're feeling. And we're at that stage now, I suppose, where, we're coming to the end of the sessions before the summer. A lot of you now will be, I suppose, preparing for your applications in September for funding with the Arts Council. So how are we feeling? Are we, I can see that some of you have already started your environmental policy and action plan, which is fantastic. Great to see that we've been attending the webinars and watching the recordings and are ready to start, or there is a plan to start working on this. So really, I suppose, the majority of you've already started or you have the plan to start working on this, and that's fantastic. So hopefully you'll be able to go back and look at the recordings and the resources, and whatever else you need in terms of getting you ready to start working on the plan. So thank you very much for that feedback. It's always really good to get that check-in and to get a sense on how you're feeling. So I suppose we'll dive straight in terms of what the focus of today's session is. And it's really about you developing your approach to avoiding and reducing your material use and waste and sourcing greener materials, goods and supplies. And today what we'll cover, we'll hear about the story of stuff from Megan. We'll go through some principles of the circular economy. We'll look at examples of the materials that you use within your organization. And I suppose, again, as with every webinar, we have many different organizations attending. Some of you will have very common materials that you all use, and then other organizations will, of course, have different materials. So we'll try and go through an example. We'll take an example of a number of different types of organizations and look at what would be the materials that you're using and purchasing. We'll go through, I suppose, the process of designing and implementing a sustainable procurement policy. We'll give you some resources and examples for that to get you started. And then, as we always do, we try to give you some best practice and examples as well to see how that's done in practice. Again, some do's and don'ts and then leave time for questions and answers. But really, I suppose the aims of today's session and what we want you to walk away with is we really want to set the scene and to explore the story of stuff, where our materials come from, and how the composition of our materials, it makes the disposal of and the reuse of materials quite complicated. We want to consider the different use of materials across all of your organizations and really explore the possibilities of applying the circular economy to our use of materials. How do we go about implementing green procurement in our decision-making process, and then sharing some best practices. And I think it's always good to look at those best practices just to be inspired with what other organizations are doing. So really, I suppose we want to start setting the scene and, get started. And Megan is going to take us on a short storytelling.
Thanks very much, Noreen, and thanks everybody for coming. Really looking forward to going through this with you and diving straight in with the story of stuff. Now, to be fair, some of you, and in fact, probably most of you, have got good awareness around this already, but we just wanted to kind of set the scene and look at the context of all of the stuff and materials that we use. So bear with us while we spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes just going through this story, looking at all of where the products we use in our daily lives come from, where the raw materials come from, and the environmental degradation that is caused by extraction activities. We'll look at production and manufacturing, distribution and consumption, disposal and waste, and the impact and solutions that we might put in place. Ultimately, it's about the impact of the life cycle of all of the materials we use on a day-to-day basis. So kind of starting with pre-industrial materials, we looked at timber and wood and stone really as prevalent materials. They were easily accessible, renewable, and relatively easy to work with using simple tools. Stone was a primary material for construction, used in various forms such as limestone, granite, and marble, and made really long-lasting structures. Metals like iron, copper, and bronze were used for tools, weapons, and basic machinery. And the process of smelting and forging was labor intensive back then, but it was crucial for creating durable tools and implements. The use of single materials, and this is the key piece, in construction and manufacturing made recycling and reuse much easier. For example, a wooden chair was made entirely of wood, which isn't true anymore these days. A stone house was constructed of blocks and stones. But the Industrial Revolution from 1760 to 1840 introduced new materials and methods that drastically changed production and consumption patterns. So I'd invite you now to think about, and maybe pop into the chat if something occurs to you, objects that are in your daily lives that are just made from one single material, if you can think of any. On then to the Industrial Revolution, which marked a significant turning point in our history. Originating in Britain and eventually spreading across Europe and North America, it transformed economies and societies. Before the Industrial Revolution, production was predominantly handcrafted, involving skilled artisans who created goods in small workshops or homes. After the Industrial Revolution, the introduction of machinery and factories revolutionized the production process, as we know. Innovations like the power loom and the steam engine enabled mass production and distribution of goods, and factories centralized production, and that's a key piece, increasing efficiency and output while reducing the need for skilled manual labor. But this had a massive environmental impact. There was an increased demand for raw materials, significant degradation, including deforestation, mining, and pollution. And of course, factories release large amounts of pollutants into the air and water. Early industrial cities were characterized by poor air quality and contaminated waterways, and this is still very true in our industrial zones today. So the Industrial Revolution set the stage for the modern industrialized world. It introduced a paradigm shift in how materials are produced and consumed. And this is critical for addressing contemporary challenges now in material sustainability and responsible sourcing and environmental impact. The legacy of this acceleration in production was a milestone that we hit back in 2020, which is a year I'm sure none of us will forget easily. But this was the year that the mass of all our man-made stuff, so our built environment, our cars, our furniture, our clothing, our gadgets, surpassed the biomass of the living world. And ultimately, it is the manufacture, distribution, and eventual disposal of all this stuff that is driving the environmental crisis that we see today. The Industrial Revolution not only transformed production methods, but also introduced a new range of new materials that revolutionized various industries. These include plastics and synthetic fibers, advanced metals, which offered unique properties and advantages over our traditional materials. The first synthetic plastic was Bakelite, invented in 1907 by Leo Baekeland. Plastics are these polymers that are made from petroleum-based chemicals, offering flexibility, durability, and moldability. The first synthetic fiber was nylon, developed by DuPont in 1935. Other synthetic fibers include polyester, acrylic, and spandex, and they offer benefits such as strength, elasticity, resistance to moisture because they're made of oil, and pests, and ease of maintenance. They're widely used in clothing, upholstery, and industrial applications. The introduction of advanced metal alloys such as stainless steel, aluminium alloys, and titanium are made by combining two or more metals to enhance properties like strength, corrosion resistance, and weight. Stainless steel, invented in the 20th century, is used in construction, medical devices, and household items due to its corrosion resistance. And aluminium, which we see all day, every day surrounding us, is lightweight and strong and used in automotive, aerospace, and packaging industries. Now, the introduction of these new materials significantly increased the variety and availability of raw materials for manufacturing. So we can now customize materials to achieve our desired properties, leading to massive innovation in product design and functionality. But while they brought these significant benefits, they also posed environmental challenges. The need for responsible material management and recycling practices becomes ever more critical in our day-to-day. So maybe have a little think now while we're chatting here about examples of products in your lives that have benefited from these new materials, and there are very, very many. Modern products then are composed of a wide array of materials that are combined to achieve specific properties and functionalities. What we're looking at here is a breakdown of a smartphone. Now, the complexity is driven by those technological advancements and the need for high performance, durable, and multifunctional products. Smartphones are complex modern products. They contain a multitude of materials, including metals, plastics, glass, and ceramics. Key components in the screen, battery, circuit board, and casing include rare earth metals like neodymium, terbium, and dysprosium, all used in the speakers, microphones, and vibration motors. Then there's precious metals. Gold, silver, and palladium are used in circuit boards for their excellent conductivity. And lithium then is used in batteries to provide long-lasting power. Rare earth materials are primarily mined in China, which holds the majority of the world's supply. Precious metals are extracted from mines in countries like South Africa, Russia, and China, and Canada. And lithium is sourced from countries with large lithium reserves, such as Australia, Chile, Argentina, and soon the Ukraine and Botswana. Now, the intricate design and miniaturization of the components make disassembly and recycling really challenging. These different materials are tightly integrated, making separation very difficult without specialized equipment. Mixed material packaging is another similar story, where it combines different materials to enhance that functionality, durability, barrier properties, and aesthetics. Common examples include plastic-coated paper, multi-layered plastic films, and metallized packaging. But they have hidden components within. There's polymers, different types of plastics like polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET, which are used for flexibility and strength and transparency. There's aluminium foil, which is an effective barrier against light, oxygen, and moisture, which extends the shelf life of products. But there's various adhesives that are used then to bond these layers of materials together. So even something as simple as the plastic coated cover on our program booklets has a more complicated story to tell. The recycling is complicated by the need to separate different materials, which is often not feasible with current recycling technologies. Mixed material packaging products, including Tetra Pak, end up in landfills due to the difficulty of efficient recycling. Tetra Pak is a key one. So maybe have a little think about the materials in your own electronic devices and packaging, and maybe pop into the chat if you can, if you fancy it, any ways you can contribute to reducing e-waste and supporting more circular practices in this space. To have a kind of look at the linear economy, which is the way our society has been built and our production models have been built over the last couple of hundred years, The linear economy, which is probably a term you've all heard, is a traditional economic system characterized by a straightforward flow of materials and products. So it follows this take, make, dispose sequence. Taking or extracting raw materials from the environment, making or manufacturing products from these materials, and discarding our products after use, often resulting in waste. So if there's any kind of products that you use that follow the linear economy model, single-use plastics are a really good example, or any disposals really. Let's have a start to think about how we can change that linear economy. To have a quick look at the environmental impact of extraction, it's a critical part of the linear economy model, and it does provide those raw materials necessary for production, but it also leads to significant environmental degradation. Deforestation is a great example, the large-scale removal of forests, primarily for logging, agriculture and mining, but it leads to habitat loss, reduced biodiversity and disruptions in the water cycle. Material extraction processes release pollutants into the air, contributing to poor air quality and health issues. And water pollution from extraction often contaminates water sources with chemicals, heavy metals and sediments, and soil pollution too. These extraction activities often occur on or near lands that are inhabited by local people, local communities, leading to displacement, health issues, and the loss of livelihoods. An example from really close to home, actually, and some of you may have come across this in the media, Dalradian, which is a Canadian gold mining company, has applied for planning permission back in 2009 to build a gold plain in the Sperrins area of outstanding natural beauty up the north. Local people have objected strongly to this. Up to date, 50,000 objections have been lodged, but the planning application, would you believe, is still under review. Now, extraction can generate significant economic gains, but the benefits are often unevenly distributed. Profits typically go to large corporations, with local communities bear the environmental and the health costs. Manufacturing, of course, is a critical phase in the life cycle of materials and products that we use on a day-to-day basis. These processes, such as smelting, forging, molding, and assembly, are highly, highly energy intensive. The manufacturing sector accounts for a significant portion of global energy consumption, second only to transport. It requires vast quantities of raw materials, metals, minerals, water, and chemicals. For example, producing 1 ton of steel can require up to 2.5 tons of iron ore and 1.5 tons of coal. Water then is crucial for cooling, washing, and as a raw material in certain chemical processes. And manufacturing is one of the largest industrial consumers of fresh water, contributing to water scarcity issues. Manufacturing also generates significant waste, including scrap materials, defective products, and industrial effluents. Fossil fuels are the primary energy sources for this, and due to their high energy density and availability, and they're used directly in production processes and indirectly to generate electricity and heat. So have a little think now, and again, pop in the chat if you fancy any of the products that you use and the energy intensity processes that are used in their production. Now, modern manufacturing and distribution rely on complex global supply chains to source raw materials, produce goods, and deliver them to consumers worldwide. And this entire global complex supply chain is also tilted in favor of the global north. So the global south is where all of the extraction happens and the exploitation happens, and the global north is what's consuming all of those goods. They often involve multiple tiers of suppliers and subcontractors, each contributing different components or services, and they're sourced globally, often crossing multiple borders before reaching the final assembly location. For example, going back to the smartphones, a smartphone might include components from over 50 different countries, would you believe? So when we were looking at the research for this, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that. And so I had a look at the embodied carbon that's in different types of smartphones. So if you look at the iPhone 11, the estimate that's out there is that the production of this carries an embodied carbon of 80 kilograms, whereas the Fairphone 4 is just 35 kilograms. There's 7.2 billion smartphones in the world. There's more smartphones in the world than there are accessible and clean toilets. So if 7.2 billion people made a switch to a Fairphone, we would be looking at a saving of 324.5 million tons of CO2. So it's just to kind of have a look at that picture, the bigger picture in terms of the supply chain, the components, and how our day-to-day decision making actually has a massive impact in terms of the embodied carbon in the materials and goods that we use. Which leads me on very nicely to consumer culture, which is what's driving all of this consumption in the first place. So this refers to a societal focus on the acquisition of goods and services driven by a desire for satisfaction and social status. Now, we're all very aware of this. The rise of consumer culture has been significantly influenced by advertising and marketing strategies that promote constant consumption. And there are lots of reports that are coming out about this in terms of Ad Net Zero and how advertising and marketing is driving this. But advertising creates demand by tapping into emotions and aspirations, convincing consumers that purchasing certain products will enhance their lives. And the reason I've dropped in this Amazon image in here is not really to do with that kind of advertising piece, but just because sometimes we make purchases in a hurry, or sometimes we make purchases using cost and budget as the only purchasing decision that we're applying. Everybody is guilty of this. We're not trying to name and shame. All of us who produce events, festivals, productions and so on, every once in a while there's something that we need, and it's something small and it's something quick and it's a quick prop that's going to assist in the narrative of the storytelling. But the reason that I'm highlighting this is because we need to get to a place where we're considering this a bit better. Waste generation then is a product of all of this consumer habits and consumption. So waste management is a critical environmental issue due to the volume and complexity of the waste and the materials that we're producing. There's different types of waste. There's municipal solid waste, that's everyday items that are discarded by households and businesses that we're doing every day, food scraps, packaging, paper, plastics. Most of this is going to incineration. That's a lovely image of our incineration plant in Ringsend there. Electronic waste is also another massive problem. Very little of it is actually captured and recycled. In the EU, we're doing better than the rest of the world, but we're still at less than 50%. Industrial waste, obviously, as we've spoken about, is generated by manufacturing and industrial processes. It includes all of those chemicals and metals and the byproducts of production. And then construction and demolition waste. This is debris from building and infrastructure products, and that there's quite a lot of construction and demolition waste apparent in the arts sector and in the creative industries in Ireland. So this includes our concrete, wood, metals and plastics. Different kind of modes of dealing with this include the incineration, recycling and composting, but most importantly, what we need to move towards is mitigation and responsible consumption practices. So putting in zero waste initiatives, plastic bans and circular product design is really key here. And then enhancing our waste collection, segregation and treatment infrastructure to manage waste more effectively. So I'm going to pause there for a little second to see if anybody fancies popping into the chat any waste reduction practices that you've started putting in place in your own organizations on your day-to-day, but also any challenges that you've encountered in trying to do this, because the challenges are many, so it's worth having a bit of discussion on it. Looking in more detail at some of these products then, plastics is the first one that everybody is highly aware of now, thanks to a lot of the education and information work that's been done in this space over recent years. But the problem with plastic is that they are durable, so they last in the environment for hundreds of years. Mismanaged plastic waste ends up in our oceans, rivers and landfills, causing widespread pollution. Microplastics is a really important one here as well. Larger plastic items break down into smaller pieces called microplastics. They contaminate our water sources and enter our food chain. They've been found in marine life, drinking water, and even in human tissues more and more regularly. These are linked to health issues, the bisphenol A, which is BPA, and all of the different chemicals that are used in plastics and that are breaking down in our natural environment. They're linked to health issues like endocrine disruption and rising cancer rates. There's some good examples of progress that's been made in this place. There's the Ocean Cleanup Project, which you guys have probably heard of, which is an initiative aimed at removing plastic waste from the ocean. And there is the SUB guide to eliminating plastics at events and festivals here in Ireland. That's a shameless plug for us, and it'll be included in the resources at the end of this session. Then looking a little bit more detail at textiles. The first synthetic fiber rayon was developed in the late 19th century as a silk substitute. And in 1935, nylon was invented by DuPont, marking the beginning of the synthetic fiber revolution. The mid-20th century saw the development of other synthetic fibers, such as polyester, acrylic, and spandex. And these offer great advantages: durability, elasticity, resistance to wrinkles, and shrinkage. But the intensive use of water and pesticides in synthetic and natural fiber production is a huge environmental issue with textiles. It takes about 2,700 litres of water to produce one cotton t-shirt. We did a carbon footprint analysis for a big event a couple of years ago, and the results of that were really telling, because we thought that transport was going to be the biggest contributor to the carbon footprint of this event. But when we got into the weeds with it, with the scope 3 and looked at their materials, as a matter of fact, it was actually one of the sponsors bringing in new t-shirts to all of their activations across the event. So it's well worth considering this one in terms of textiles. Synthetic fiber production uses a lot of petrochemicals. They're derived, as I said, from petroleum. So polyester production relies on fossil fuels and generates significant greenhouse emissions. They involve toxic chemicals that can pollute air and water. Nylon production, in fact, releases nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas. And both natural and synthetic fiber production are very energy-intensive processes. Looking in more detail then at electronic devices such as smartphones, laptops, tablets, and household appliances, which are integral to our daily life. They're complex, as I said, composed of multi-materials and intricate components that enhance that functionality but complicate our recycling efforts. So they often contain hazardous substances like lead, mercury, cadmium, and brominated flame retardants. Improper handling can release these toxins into the environment, and often they are improperly handled and disposed of, which poses massive health risks. And of course, the growing demand for electronics contributes to the depletion of our natural resources, including those rare earth elements and precious metals. So mining for materials like cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo often involves hazardous working conditions and environmental destruction. So a circular economy around e-waste is really, really important to move towards. Construction then relies heavily on materials like concrete, steel, and timber due to their durability, versatility, and availability. These materials are fundamental to building infrastructure, to our sets and our props in the arts sector. Timber is a natural renewable material as long as it's provided from sustainably sourced forests. It's used in construction for that framing, flooring, roofing, and finishing. And trees are fantastic because, of course, they sequester CO2 as they grow. And timber structures can act as carbon sinks, storing the lifespan for the lifespan of the building. There's certification programs like the FSC. We'll go into that more in a minute. And then there is a huge amount of recycling possibilities using reclaimed wood and repurposing it for new construction projects, reducing the need for bringing in new timbers. So designing infrastructure to use materials efficiently and reduce waste is a key one. Modular construction techniques can minimize material waste. And then using different kind of alternatives like bamboo and recycled plastic composites is really important. But evaluating the environmental impact of materials from that extraction to disposal or eventual reuse using a life cycle assessment is really key to making informed choices. So comparing the embodied energy and carbon footprint of different materials is a really important one. And we will have a bit of a case study, as Noreen mentioned, on construction in the arts sector at the end of the webinar. So that was just a quick run through really of the story of stuff, which highlights the journey of materials from extraction to disposal and emphasizing the need for responsible procurement practices. Understanding that life cycle and really lifting the veil in terms of material blindness, which we have in the day-to-day because we're moving through our lives so fast. But it's crucial to set the scene and understand the context for reducing waste, conserving resources, and protecting the environment. Embracing innovative technologies and responsible design and a circular economy can help address the challenges of material consumption and waste. So I have a very quick, brief explainer video on the circular economy here, which I will play for you now to just give you a break from my voice, I guess. So let's hope that the technology is with us.
Take, make, use, and dispose. For decades, this is how companies have been taking raw materials and transforming them into products purchased by consumers who ultimately toss them out. But now people are challenging this linear model and urging a so-called circular economy. So how is the circular economy different from recycling?
The two ideas are related, but a circular economy is more systemic and ambitious than a linear one. Most recyclable products in a linear economy ultimately get downgraded into waste. But in a circular economy, no new material input is needed. That leads to less waste and ultimately reduced costs. The linear economy often leads to a system that is inefficient and costly and depletes natural resources. A byproduct of this is material waste, which takes up space and may include contaminants, threatening biodiversity. But still making a production cycle fully self-sufficient is virtually impossible. Some new input will always be necessary. Some waste will always be created. Building a circular economy also requires high upfront costs. And some say a circular economy will only ultimately delay the negative environmental effects of the linear economy. Consumers are largely responsible for pushing organizations towards the circular economy and can get companies to invest in more circular supply chains. For example, SC Johnson & Son and Unilever are developing refillable packages for cleaning products and laundry detergents. Governments also have a hand, making cross-border commitments and developing action plans to move toward a more circular economy. So slowly, we're seeing people become more and more conscious, and they are challenging the sustainability of the linear economy model.
Yeah, so just a quick video on the circular economy there. We just wanted to find something that was only 2 minutes long. There's better explainers out there, but I liked the fact that Enda is an Irishman presenting that one, so we thought we'd include it. So I wanted to just quickly have a look at the different materials that are in use by all of your organizations on a day-to-day. If you wouldn't mind filling in the poll there and let us know what type of materials are you regularly using? No doubt it's most likely all of them, because as we've explained, all of our materials are now mixed together in terms of our day-to-day items, making the issue very, very complex. So I'll give you just a minute or two to fill that in. And while we're going through that, we're going to have a little look at some of the materials and creative use of them in our cultural sector. So, for example, plastics and moldings are widely used in particularly for productions, theatres, sets, festivals, and so on. We also have quite a lot of textile use, massive textile use in Ireland, and there are starting to be initiatives that are popping up around this. There's the Circular Costumes Ireland that some of you guys may have heard of, and these guys rent out at a very reasonable price different kind of bits and pieces that we can use in our costumes and in our productions. I can see that we have 12 respondents to our poll, and it looks like, yeah, very high use of electronics, very high use of paper, quite a lot of packaging, less so in textiles, and a little bit, and maybe about half of you are using timber on a regular basis. So this is it exactly what we've just been talking about. There's a high amount of different types of materials that are out there. Good to see that there's people using paints and adhesives as well, because there's specific impact areas that we can approach there. Other examples of materials that we're using on a regular basis, obviously, are electronics. Here's an example of a creative reuse of e-waste at one of the festivals that we worked at last year. So there's lots of different kind of materials out there. Timber is huge in our industry and in our sector. A little case study here. This was an exhibition that had been up and running for a couple of years, taken down, and then all of this timber was stored for a couple of years. The guys were going to send it to scrap, so we salvaged it. It's about 20 grand's worth of timber in there that we made and reused and have reused it a number of times in a modular fashion for different kind of exhibitions and installs. Other examples include lots of the different circular initiatives that we've done at the Body and Soul Festival, trying to employ circular economy principles there. And these guys actually have a material bank that we're hoping to establish a forum for sharing all of these assets in the circular economy. Another nice little case study that's sprung up recently is Production Resources Ireland. This is a Facebook group that anybody can join, and specifically around film production, theatre production, set production, and it's about posting on it if you have a resource that you can share with somebody else, or if you're looking for something, an asset or a prop that you can use that facility to kind of share all those materials. And then a very quick look at paper, because paper is something that we all use every single day in our offices, resource organizations, in our productions and everything else. And a really simple starting point potentially for a materials procurement policy could be around our paper. In the first instance, can we investigate using recycled paper instead of virgin? There is a really nice stationery shop up there on the North Circular Road, and they are available online as well, called Clee Paper, and all of their materials and stationery that they sell are responsibly and sustainably sourced. As a second alternative, if we can't get at recycling paper for whatever reason, ensuring that we're using FSC certified. So this is the Forest Stewardship Council certified paper. So this means that it has been sourced from those sustainably managed forests, and it's not cutting down indigenous or primary forests. And also just the ink that we use when we're printing. Can we print in black and white instead of color? Using color ink, would you believe, is more energy intensive in the production and in the energy use. So there's simple little things that we can include in our procurement policy that anybody can get started on straight away in terms of those regularly used materials. Which I think, Noreen, is a nice segue into you taking over from here in terms of having a look at the materials that we use and what our procurement policies might be around that. I'll stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Megan. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at another poll, please. So we'll share screen, and you should be able to see my screen and a poll. And it's just, and I suppose, if you have an idea of the percentage of your overall funding that you spend on materials, you might need to think about that. I know some of you are straight in there in terms of just that percentage, because I suppose we just want to get an idea of what that spend is. And, even if it is as low as 10%, that might seem low and insignificant, but what if all of us, all of the organizations on this webinar training series, if we were all to consider starting the move, or, I suppose progressing on the move to more sustainable and green procurement, then collectively we would have, a very large impact. And I suppose it's really thinking about, what is our influence as a sector? And, there are some actions that are within our control to really consider environmental and social impacts, as well as the costs in our buying process. And really that is what it's all about. So you can see there that it's not more than 20%, but collectively, that is a huge impact. So that's, I suppose, good just to, again, to set the scene to see what our influence is. But I suppose traditionally procurement, it has all been about cost. And, this is a very important criteria. But as we've been hearing from Megan, everything we buy leaves a trail of environmental impacts. And that's from the materials used and their extraction to the energy and water used in the manufacture, the transport and the consumption of these services and goods, through to, their use time and their disposal. And we can see that sometimes the disposal of these goods is quite difficult. So it does make our purchasing decisions very powerful in terms of influencing positive change. And I suppose, we'll all be different sized organizations, our contracts with suppliers, they might be big, they might be small, but we all have that strong leverage in terms of steering the supply chain in a more sustainable direction. And I suppose integrating environmental and social sustainability into our decisions about products and services, it's not easy. It will require planning and research. We might need to look at changes to our contracts and to our, I suppose, decision making processes. But I suppose as we progress, there's growing availability of environmentally conscious products, and hopefully that process gets more straightforward as time goes on. But certainly to acknowledge, it's, I suppose, the cost of materials is very important. But I think in terms of where there's a growing demand for greener products and services, then this will start driving the price down. So it's really all about creating that demand for these services and goods. And I suppose, as Megan, spoke about it, it's considering reusing materials and repurposing materials and salvaging materials. So we're not just talking about, I suppose, purchasing more eco-friendly materials. It's that mindset of looking at what we have and really understanding how can we use what we have. And I suppose also it's considering the social impacts of what we are purchasing. You know, do we kind of stop and think about the supply chain of the products and the services that we're purchasing? And really, I suppose, thinking about, you know, are suppliers getting a fair price for their products? How are they competing against Amazon? You know, and Megan spoke about, you know, I suppose, you know, making those last minute decisions and going on to Amazon because we need to, but really, I suppose, thinking about, well, who are our local suppliers? And I suppose it really is all about, you know, the power of influencing change and steering change in that positive direction. I suppose in terms of the scope for sustainable or green procurement, I know that, you know, we spoke a lot about materials, but it's also looking at all of these touch points in terms of your organization and the work that you're doing. And I suppose everyone within the organization would have, you know, different needs, and they'll be looking at different areas, but it's really sitting down and looking at all of our activities across the board. And I suppose really understanding that green procurement is relevant for all of these areas, really. And, you know, some of you here today, you know, this will be relevant for all of you. And then I suppose some might, I suppose the key areas, you know, it might differ between organizations, but it's just very good to take a look at this and understand that we can apply green procurement across all these areas, really. I suppose just some touch points in terms of starting out. And again, you know, it'll be different for organizations of different sizes, but maybe a good place to start with is, you know, making a list of the things we buy, our suppliers and our annual spend. And a small organization will know that immediately because, you know, it's one or two people doing all of this, but a larger organization might bring their team together to understand and really to look at our buying systems and our decision-making processes. And, you know, we might have an informal decision-making process, but I think it's good to kind of sit down and ask ourselves a few questions before we start looking at a green procurement policy. Like, do we have an ordering system in place that already considers environmental sustainability? Is there an opportunity for staff to suggest more environmentally sustainable alternatives? And I know that that's something that we're going to look at as part of the resources and maybe those peer-to-peer sessions that we spoke about last week, you know, because I think there's a lot of knowledge out there, but it's quite informal knowledge. So it's bringing the sector together to learn from each other about, you know, where to source salvage materials, for example. Who in the organization decides how much and of what is bought? And, you know, consider ourselves, are we planning our purchasing? You know, as Megan said, is it the last minute decisions? You know, sometimes that's very necessary. It's the nature of the work that we do, but, you know, can we try to eliminate that as much as possible? I suppose it's always good to consider the entire life cycle of the goods and services we buy. You know, I suppose some of that is outside of our control in terms of purchasing, but I think it makes us think differently in how we use and reuse materials. You know, do we have the opportunity to engage with our suppliers and just have that conversation in terms of their understanding of where their goods and services that they're providing is coming from, and just maybe, I suppose, you know, exploring that conversation with them. Your contracts, you know, which, if any of your contracts are coming up for renewal, are you, I suppose, writing in that green procurement piece into your contracts? And there's good resources that we will give you later on in terms of how you can do that. And then I suppose as an organization, you know, what environmental or social criteria matter most to the people in your organization. And that might also inform your procurement policy and your decision-making process. But really, I suppose it's a huge area, you know, but maybe some key points would be, as an organization, you know, come together and have this discussion, agree on your minimum green requirements for different suppliers and products and services. You know, look at the decision-making process. So, you know, how is a decision made and what is the criteria? And if you have that policy, you know, that's the reference document for any staff making purchases, because it's quite difficult, you know, through busy times, you know, you're not going to stop and say, oh, hang on a second, let's think about our green procurement decision-making process. If you have that in a policy, then it's easier for staff, and they have that, I suppose, reference point, and it acts as a reminder as well, really. But it's, you know, we're not saying that we have to create a whole new policy. This is part of the environmental policy and action plan that you're working on now, it should be very clear and simple and straight to the point, so that it will be used and that your team will understand that this is part of a purchasing decision-making process. And then you might create targets and goals as part of your environmental policy and action plan when it comes to procurement. But I think what's important is that you're constantly speaking to your suppliers and your vendors, because, you know, as new products and services are coming onto the market, then it's very important to engage with them, to learn about that, and to have that information and that communication between you as well. But I suppose it's always good to look at examples and that practical piece. And I suppose what we did, we looked at different organizations to try and understand, well, what are the goods and services that they will be frequently purchasing. This is really like a snapshot. Obviously, you know, for theatres, you'll know what all of that purchasing criteria is. But we just did a walkthrough, I suppose, a pre-production, production and post-production process to identify all of the possible green procurement goods and services. And we looked at lighting and energy and the sets, the paints that are used, the costumes and props. We looked at water conservation, transportation, the use of paper and cleaning products. And I suppose we tried to understand, well, you know, what would that green procurement criteria look like? And of course, you know, we could have added a lot more to this, but it was just, I suppose, for us to start thinking of this process if we were a theatre organisation. We did the same for resource organisations, just, I suppose, putting ourselves into that organisation and really thinking about, well, what would be the common goods and services purchased, and what would a green procurement look like? And, you know, that's I suppose an exercise that, you know, some of you might find useful to start out with. And again, we did the same for a production company. So it's really, I suppose, you know, understanding and walking through a process. And of course, you'll have your list of purchasing and suppliers already, but it's just always good to have that discussion and to see what the options are. In terms of the guides that are available, and these are really useful because they break it down and we will provide these resources as well as part of the recording and the slides. But this is really useful because it kind of goes through a step-by-step process in terms of how do you develop a sustainable procurement policy? You know, what are the considerations that you need to take into account in choosing and liaising with suppliers, or keeping your existing suppliers, but having that conversation with them and saying, well, are there any other options? What's on the market? What is available? It goes through procurement and waste, contracting and tendering, and then really buying with environmental sustainability in mind. And the Julie's Bicycle Sustainable Procurement Guide also provides a really nice list of resources itself. So these are really helpful documents as a reference point to get you started. Of course, our own public procurement guide. This is very useful also, and we'll include that in the resources because it just goes through all of the impact areas and kind of maps out how you can implement green procurement around all of these areas. So again, I suppose these are the resources that you'll go back to, you know, you'll reference all the time. And I suppose a procurement policy, that's a living document. You're always adding to it because there's always new products and services coming to the market. So we would highly recommend taking a look at both of these. And then we just wanted to include some practical examples. Again, this is a really lovely one. I love this. It's from Butler Gallery, and it's their ecological approaches to art making, processes and materials use. And I suppose if you kind of look through their programming over the past year or so, you can really see how the team are making this conscious effort to really, I suppose, consider you know, I suppose how they're making art and the materials they're using, and engaging with artists that are doing a lot of this. But maybe just to mention a few, the kitchen chemistry example there, this workshop was an introduction to the basics of extracting natural pigments from ingredients found solely in the kitchen. The sculpture making, this was, I suppose, creating unique sculptures using sustainable materials, and participants learned practical methods for creating alternatives to traditional plastics. and they were learning how to create biodegradable resins and plastics, which is wonderful. The ceramics program, that was a program examining Irish biodiversity loss and the things we can do to reverse this. And again, I just wanted to go through the last two there because it's just so fabulous. The tools to nourish ourselves, that was a day of foraging and whittling, where participants learned how to safely identify, harvest, process and preserve a range of spring plants for food and medicine, and then cook them. And then the plant-based alternatives to photographic processes. So this is part of their annual residency, and it looks at developing plant-based photography techniques and eco-friendly darkroom practices in the Butler Gallery. But there's loads on their website, and it's just really nice examples of, I suppose, their programming, the materials they're using, and the artists they're engaging with. And another example, which I'll use from Butler Gallery, this is really beautiful. It's from the artist Eamon Coleman, and the 28 acres, that was a site that inspired him. It was a former iron ore and coal mining area. So there's just so many connections there between, I suppose, the exhibition and the inspiration. But really what Eamon did was he made his own paint using raw organic pigment and his own paper using a Japanese method. So that's definitely worth a look. And then another example, which is very different, which we would, I suppose, recommend taking a look at also, is the Lyric Theatre in Belfast. Now, they've done a lot, so I won't go through them all, but I suppose you can see there where they're touching on very different impact areas in terms of their green procurement. And they recently appointed a scenic construction manager, which was really interesting. And I have a video actually from the scenic construction manager that I'm going to play for you. So I'm going to stop share and go into that now, because this is a wonderful video.
Saw and a board and I'll cut it. I'll climb up a ladder with a hammer and a nail and I'll nail it. Well, we worked so hard to build a little house together. In the snow or the rain or the ice cold wind, whenever. No matter what the weather, we're together.
Brilliant. And I think we just are almost up to time. So I will just share the next steps in terms of where we can take this from here, because it's a large topic. So there's some do's and don'ts, which will include obviously in the resources. But I suppose in terms of what's next, obviously we'll remind you to complete the feedback form, but we will be sending out a mid-program feedback survey within the next few days. We will obviously send you the further resources. They'll be included with the recordings, and then an overview of sustainable suppliers, because we know that this is information that is probably very useful to you. And then during the peer-to-peer sessions that we spoke about last week, I think it would be great to include materials in that also, in terms of sharing our knowledge and best practice.